We are never more exposed to inner disintegration than when we fall in love. Carl Jung didn't frame love as peace. He saw it as transformation, and transformation demands friction. She doesn't seek comfort, she craves tension, not out of cruelty, but because that tension awakens something ancestral within her psyche. Long before you tried to decode her behavior with logic and kindness, Jung warned of the unconscious forces that govern attraction, archetypes far more powerful than reason. Beneath the softness of her voice, beneath the smiles and sweetness, there's often a deeper longing, not for predictability, but for polarity, not for safety, but for intensity. If you, as a man, still believe that presence, validation, and availability are enough to win her devotion, then you are blind to the forces playing beneath the surface. Because Jung saw what most men cannot face. A woman's desire is shaped not by her conscious ideals, but by her unconscious needs. And those needs are not gentle. This isn't misogyny. This isn't bitterness. It's psychology, inscribed in the architecture of the psyche. Jung, the man who dared to map the human soul, didn't ask, "What does a woman want?" like Freud did. He asked instead, "What inner image does she project onto the men she chooses?" And the answer is terrifying. Even she doesn't fully know, because what a woman consciously says she wants and what she unconsciously seeks are often diametrically opposed. Her words speak of security and affection, but her instincts are drawn to mystery, to strength, to danger. Why? Because danger represents individuation. The man she's drawn to is not the one who gives her his soul. It's the one who has a soul. And even more, one who has wrestled with it, the man who has faced his shadow, integrated it, and does not depend on her for wholeness. That is the man her unconscious recognizes. That is the man who stirs her anima. She says she wants a kind man, but texts back the one who disappears. She says she wants someone who listens, but obsesses over the one who feels out of reach. She says she wants peace, but her soul races for the one who embodies inner conflict because it mirrors her own. Jung believed that human desire is not about logic, but about longing for lost parts of the self. And this longing plays out in relationships. She doesn't seek you. She seeks the mirror of her unconscious, and often that mirror is carved in contradiction. He called it projection. The tendency to cast inner needs and fears onto others. The tragedy is this: the man who offers total transparency, emotional exposure, and undivided devotion becomes, in her psyche, a mirror too clear, too familiar. He becomes manageable, and what is manageable cannot awaken the archetypal drama she secretly yearns for. What she truly responds to is polarity, the dance between masculine containment and feminine expansion. The more you offer your need, the more she retreats. Not because she is shallow, but because she is seeking a man who cannot be absorbed into her moods. A man who does not drown in her storms. A man who stands firm, not in dominance over her, but in sovereignty over himself. You were told to be open, to be sensitive, to prove your worth by exposing your wounds. But Jung would warn, what you call vulnerability may actually be unconscious manipulation, an attempt to earn love through self-sacrifice. And that, to the feminine psyche, is not noble. It is weak, because the unconscious mind does not respond to words. It responds to symbols, power, contrast, and presence. It seeks tension, polarity, resistance. That's why she pulls away when you give her everything. That's why she loses interest when you hand over your heart without boundaries, not because she doesn't care, but because the unconscious cannot desire what it already owns. And here's the paradox Jung pointed out. The man who owns himself, one who contains his chaos, who restrains his hunger, who leads with silence rather than sentiment, that man is dangerous, not because he threatens, but because he cannot be tamed. He is not rude. He is not cruel, but he is whole, and his wholeness cannot be bargained for. This is what Freud missed and Jung revealed. A woman's unconscious desire is not drawn to male submission, but to male self-possession. She wants to surrender, but only to someone who cannot be moved by her tests. Not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't collapse. You gave her everything, your love, your presence, your soul, and she walked away. And you thought it was something you did wrong. But Jung would say, it wasn't your actions, it was your alignment. You stepped out of your center. You became a function of her validation. And in doing so, you broke the archetype. You lost the polarity. She didn't want your perfection. She wanted your depth. And depth by its nature contains mystery. It contains a part of you that cannot be touched, even by her. This is the power of the self, the part of you that lives, beyond persona and mask, beyond approval and rejection. And when that self leads, you become unforgettable, not because you chase, but because you radiate gravity. The modern man has been told that the path to a woman's heart is paved with emotional openness, that if he's vulnerable enough, transparent enough, attentive enough, she will see his worth. But Carl Jung would warn that what she sees is not what she responds to, because the feminine unconscious isn't wired for ease. It is drawn to challenge, to symbolic death and rebirth, to the man who disrupts her surface calm and reaches something deeper. You weren't told this. You were told to explain yourself, to over-communicate, to prove that you're safe. But Jung's work shows safety does not seduce, sovereignty does. The masculine principle that attracts is not the one that begs to be understood. It's the one that understands itself. In his writings on the anima, Jung described how the feminine within each man tends to project itself outward. You fall for her, you admire her beauty, her mystery, her intensity, but in truth, you're falling in love with an image, your own unconscious femininity reflected in her. And just as she does this to you, she does it to the masculine as well. This is why women are often drawn to men who evoke tension instead of comfort, men who don't orbit around them, but around a purpose greater than either of them. These are not cruel men, they are centered men. Men who are not lost in their anima, who have integrated her rather than being consumed by her. And this is exactly what you were taught to avoid. You were told to be emotionally available, to communicate every thought, every need, every fear. But you weren't told what Jung knew, that too much exposure of the self, without structure, without depth, without individuation, breeds contempt, not connection. You become readable, predictable, seen fully too soon. And in that full exposure, desire evaporates, because desire is born in mystery, in polarity, in space. This is why so many women are drawn to men who seem detached, not because they are cold, but because they have not given themselves away. They are living their myth. They are men of symbolic gravity, and gravity in Jungian terms is not domination, it is integration. A man whose ego is no longer ruled by impulses, nor desperate for approval, becomes magnetic without even trying. She feels this, not in her thoughts, but in her body. You don't need to say the right thing, you need to be the right energy, not according to her checklist, but according to her unconscious imprint. And that imprint, shaped over centuries, shaped by culture, myth, evolution, and survival, responds to strength. Not brute strength, but spiritual strength. Inner clarity, stillness. That's why the man who withholds his validation, not as a tactic but as a result of inner self-containment, becomes attractive in ways no surface-level affirmation ever could. You were taught to be good. Jung would tell you to be whole, and wholeness includes the shadow, the part of you that wants to dominate, to run, to fight, to withdraw, to conquer. The part that you were taught to deny in order to be accepted, but by denying it, you didn't become lovable. You became hollow. She can feel this too. She may not articulate it. She may not even know why she suddenly feels disinterested, irritated, distant. But somewhere within her psyche, The feminine principle senses when a man has not faced his darkness, and she cannot fully surrender to a man who hasn't met his own edge, because if you have not met your own darkness, you will fear hers. You will flinch when she tests you. You will panic when she becomes cold. You will shrink when she challenges your value. And the moment you shrink, the polarity collapses. You become not a partner, but a mirror of her instability. And she will push you away, not because she wants to, but because her unconscious cannot attach to a man who cannot hold space for her chaos. You thought your consistency would make her stay, but consistency without depth is predictability. And predictability, in the realm of passion, is poison. What Jung knew, and what modern men forget, is that women do not desire accessibility. They desire authenticity. A man who is deeply himself, even if that self is flawed, broken, unfinished, but real and unavailable, not because he is playing games, but because his soul is already occupied with his mission, his work, his evolution. And that paradoxically is what allows her to feel something ancient, reverence. The pull not to possess him, but to trust him, to lean into him, to let go, because he won't. You were not meant to orbit her emotions. You were meant to embody direction, not rigid control, but inner truth, the kind of truth that cannot be seduced by flattery or destroyed by rejection, the kind of truth that builds legacy. Carl Jung wrote that the goal of life is individuation, becoming whole. And you do not become whole by being liked. You become whole by facing what you fear, especially within yourself. Your fear of being alone, your fear of rejection, your fear of being misunderstood. All of it must be brought to the surface, not to be removed, but to be owned, because the man who owns his fears cannot be manipulated by hers. Jung taught that the unconscious is not a chaotic force to be feared, but a hidden intelligence, one that shapes our desires, fears, projections, and attachments. For the modern man, the tragedy is this. He tries to win love with surface traits while ignoring the deeper energies she's actually responding to. And she doesn't even know why she responds the way she does, but her psyche does. You gave her attention, stability, warmth, and still she drifted, cold, indifferent. Jung would say it's because you offered her the ego, not the self. You showed her your personality, your politeness, your effort. But what she longed for was something deeper, something rooted, something sovereign. She was searching for an archetype, not a checklist. The archetype of the king, the magician, the warrior, the lover in his fullness. Not the man who seeks approval through sacrifice, but the man who stands in the full integration of his instinct and his intention. The man whose presence speaks louder than his emotions. And here's the hard truth. She cannot respect what she can easily control. Not because she is cruel, but because her feminine unconscious tests for containment. The moment she senses you, bend too far, explain too much, chase too eagerly, she feels it, not in her thoughts, in her nervous system, in her soul. Why? Because Jungian psychology teaches that what is unresolved within us seeks form in the outer world. That means her emotional volatility, her confusion, her need to provoke, all of it is often her unconscious searching for a container, a man who doesn't just survive her fire, but holds it without flinching. You were told to calm her with your words. Jung would tell you to calm yourself with your silence, because your silence, when it comes from presence and not fear, is your power. This is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of essence. The problem is that most men confuse emotional availability with emotional exposure. You think giving her your every thought is strength, but the feminine unconscious is not drawn to transparency. It is drawn to contrast, to tension, to depth that resists being fully seen. She doesn't want to see all of you, not at first. She wants to sense the part of you that she can't reach. The part that stands beyond her moods, the part that remains unshaken when she withdraws, when she cries, when she challenges, that part is not your weakness. It is your anchor. And without that anchor, she will drift. This is the gravity Jung spoke of, the masculine principle that does not collapse into chaos, but integrates it. And yet, you were trained to do the opposite. You were trained to soften your edges, to apologize for your masculinity, to treat polarity as toxic and desire as oppressive. But the truth is, desire dies without polarity, and polarity dies without tension. This is why the nice guy finishes last, not because he lacks morals, but because he lacks magnetism. He has no shadow, he has no edge. He's a mirror of what she already knows, and what she knows cannot awaken the unconscious. The dangerous man, in Jungian terms, is not a criminal or a brute. He is the man who knows his darkness and doesn't hide it. The man who doesn't need her to rescue him from his hunger because he has already mastered it. That's what makes him desirable, not his control over her, but his control over himself. In the mythic language of the psyche, he is the dragon slayer, not because he slays her, but because he has slain his own fear of rejection, of abandonment, of loss. He has made peace with solitude, and that peace radiates power. You may think women want your sensitivity, but Jung would remind you, what they really want is your containment, your spine, your silence that doesn't seek approval, your mission that doesn't bend for attention. When you orbit her emotions, you become a tool of her unconscious testing. She pokes, she pulls, she provokes, not to destroy you, but to find the line. And if you have no line, she cannot trust you. If you have no inner frame, she cannot lean into you. If you are moved by every mood, every tear, every withdrawal, then she knows, even if unconsciously, you are not the man who can hold her storm. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, the confrontation with everything you deny, repress, and disown in yourself. And until you confront it, you will keep bleeding into relationships, expecting women to heal wounds that only you can face. Because here is the paradox: the more you need her, the less she can feel you. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming whole. When you are whole, you no longer chase, you choose. You no longer beg, you invite. You no longer offer your soul as a sacrifice. You offer it as a mirror, and only to the one who sees its worth. That is the man she cannot forget, the one whose presence is not a performance but a reality, the man whose life moves forward with or without her, the man whose mission is his compass. And in that space, in that gravity, she feels something rare: freedom within surrender. Carl Jung didn't teach men to become likable. He taught them to become whole. And wholeness does not emerge from pleasing others. It emerges from facing yourself. You wonder why she pulls away when you're most available, why she tests you right after you give her everything, why she creates tension when things feel calm. You assume it's because you're not enough. But Jung would say, no, it's because you abandoned your center. She did not fall in love with your devotion. She fell in love with your direction. And when you surrendered that direction, when you replaced depth with availability, purpose with reassurance, stillness with apology, she could no longer feel your essence. And feminine energy, above all else, craves to feel. Jung believed we all carry within us opposing forces, masculine and feminine, light and shadow, order and chaos. And only through conscious integration of these forces can we become our truest self. But most men are taught to amputate their masculine core in order to be accepted. They're told that power is toxic, that certainty is arrogance, that boundaries are oppression. So they soften. They mold themselves to fit her moods. They make her emotions their compass. And they become, unknowingly, emotionally feminized. Not in gender, but in energy. They forget how to hold, how to lead, how to resist being pulled off course. This is not strength, it is surrender. Not to love, but to fear, and women feel this instantly. They may not say it out loud, but their psyche does. Their instincts do, because the feminine unconscious, shaped by millennia of evolutionary and symbolic conditioning, cannot admire what it can fully consume. She wants closeness, yes, but not at the cost of your sovereignty. She wants intimacy, but only with a man who cannot be devoured. She doesn't test you to break you. She tests you to find you, and if every time she gets upset, you chase. If every time she goes cold, you beg. If every time she withdraws, you panic, you show her something devastating, that your spine is for sale. Jung would call this a failure of integration. The man stuck in his persona, wearing masks of niceness and emotional transparency, while never truly owning his core. And the woman he chases, she becomes the stage upon which his unexamined wounds are played out. But the man she respects, the one she remembers, is not the one who never feels fear. It's the one who doesn't bow to it. He doesn't need to argue. He doesn't explain himself unnecessarily. He doesn't collapse under her emotions, not because he lacks empathy, but because he doesn't lose identity in the presence of her chaos. He has become who Jung called the individuated man, the one who has unified the opposites within, the one who walks through life with gravity, with inner architecture, with a silence that commands more than words ever could. He is not emotionally absent. He is emotionally rooted, and rootedness is the rarest thing in today's world, where men are trained to seek approval, to perform vulnerability, to be endlessly accessible. But this accessibility has a cost. It kills mystery. It dissolves polarity. It makes him emotionally safe, and therefore sexually invisible. She doesn't want to mother you. She wants to merge with you, but only if your soul is sovereign. She wants to surrender, but only to a man who cannot be controlled. Because true surrender is not about loss, it's about trust. And a woman cannot trust what she can predict. This is what the ancient myths knew, why the heroes had to enter the underworld before winning the maiden. Why kings were tested in isolation before being crowned. Because power without integration is dangerous, and love without tension is hollow. So Jung didn't teach men to beg for love. He taught them to build themselves until they became worthy of love that chooses them, not out of need, but out of reverence. And that reverence is not earned by emotional transparency alone. It is earned by depth. You become magnetic not by giving her your entire soul at once, but by becoming a man whose soul is centered, a man who walks with silence, not because he's withholding, but because he knows what is sacred doesn't scream. You don't need to be more expressive. You need to be more present. And presence is not energy you perform. It is energy you embody. It is the stillness behind your gaze, the restraint in your reactions, the direction in your posture. And when she senses that, even if you're not her type, even if she can't explain why, her body remembers something ancient, her soul leans in. Because now, she can finally let go. Not to a man who crumbles, but to a man who contains. Not to a man who follows her storm, but to the one who watches it unmoved. That is the man she respects. That is the man she desires. That is the man she will never forget. Carl Jung didn't ask men to perform strength. He asked them to discover it. Not in domination, not in pretending, but in the quiet crucible of self-confrontation. Because the man who becomes truly dangerous is not the one who seeks to control others, but the one who has mastered himself. And this is what women feel at the deepest level, even when they can't explain it. You've been told that love is about emotional openness, about pouring yourself out until she sees your worth. But Jung would offer a warning. If you hand her your essence before you've earned your own respect, you've already surrendered the only thing that ever made you magnetic. Love doesn't grow in exposure. It grows in tension, in polarity, in the space between two sovereign beings who choose each other not out of emptiness, but out of power. You thought your vulnerability would awaken her devotion, but what awakens her is your restraint, your capacity to feel deeply and still, not flinch, to love without begging, to stay calm in the face of her chaos, to walk away, not in anger, but in clarity, when your truth is violated. She doesn't want a servant. She doesn't want a therapist. She doesn't want a mirror of her own emotion. She wants a man who stands in the fire of his own becoming. And that man isn't the one who tries to fix her. It's the one who doesn't need her to be fixed. He doesn't rush to explain. He doesn't collapse into apology. He doesn't argue to win. His presence is the answer. His life is not an audition for affection, it's a declaration of purpose. And purpose, Jung taught, is not something you chase. It's something you remember. It was buried beneath your people-pleasing, your insecurity, your wounded boyhood. You'd need to be chosen, but when you stop chasing her approval and start walking your path, with or without her, everything changes. Because now, you're no longer trying to win her, you're inviting her. You don't seduce her with sentimentality. You magnetize her with structure, not rigid roles, but rooted energy, the clarity of your values, the command in your silence, the non-reactivity in your posture. Jung called this the self, the center of your psyche, formed through the painful, liberating journey of integration. And that journey, the path of individuation, is the most dangerous thing a man can walk. Why? Because it requires you to give up your illusions, especially the ones you were taught about women. The illusion that love is guaranteed if you're good enough. The illusion that expressing more emotion creates more passion. The illusion that the feminine wants softness over sovereignty, all lies, all traps. Because here's the truth Jung knew, but most men ignore. She will only feel safe enough to surrender when you have become the kind of man who cannot be controlled. Not because you're cold, but because you're complete, and that completion is not something you find in her eyes. It's something you forge in your own shadow. You don't become this man by watching videos. You become him by returning to the silence, the solitude, the sacred space within yourself that no one else can touch. The part of you that doesn't break when she withdraws, that doesn't panic when she tests, that doesn't plead when she doubts, because that part of you is your spine. And she will never love you more than when she feels that spine is real, not a posture, not a mask, but a reality. You were told to lead with your heart, but Jung would say, a man must first lead with his soul. Because if you sacrifice your soul to win her affection, you become forgettable, replaceable, just another man who begged to be chosen. But when you choose yourself, when you become a man of presence, silence, and direction, she cannot help but feel it, even if she doesn't know why. Because the feminine psyche doesn't crave ease. It craves depth. It craves the gravity of a man who is not a boy in disguise. It craves the strength of a man who isn't swayed by storms. It craves the unspoken power of the man who can hold everything, including himself. This is the man she can admire. This is the man she can trust. This is the man she can surrender to without fear. And this man, brother, is not out there. He is within you, waiting, under the wounds, under the people-pleasing, under the shame, under the mask. And the moment you stop seeking to be chosen and start choosing yourself, that's the moment everything shifts. The same women who ignored you will start to feel drawn again. The same silence that once repelled them becomes magnetic, because they no longer see a man who needs them. They see a man who remembers himself, and that is the only kind of man who is truly unforgettable.